Hi, welcome to another in our Gardner Tech video series. In this edition, we're going to be taking a look at some of the latest advice, thoughts, and ideas that we've got around the current COVID-19 impact around the globe, and some of the things that we're seeing, and how we're dealing with those, and some of the lessons that we've learned. So to help me to discuss that today, I'm joined by a venerable panel of people, Frank Coward, Jason Fitzgerald, and Steve Lambert. Before we start, why don't I get the guys to introduce themselves? So let's start with you, Frank. Who are you? What is you do?
Hi, I'm Frank Coward. I'm the CEO of Gardner's and have been for about 35 years. So what does that tell you? A great deal of experience, I guess. A great deal of exchange with a variety of clients through a variety of technologies, and learning how to adapt and to deal with challenges and changes, which is pretty much what everybody's doing at the moment.
Indeed, an understatement there, challenges and changes at the moment, I think. Jason, what about yourself? Who are you? What is you do?
Hi, I'm Jason Fitzgerald, technical consultant for Gardner Systems. I work to deliver customer IT projects. I've spent about the past month tackling COVID from a technical perspective, so rolling out systems.
Yeah, that's certainly no doubt been a challenging time, and we can dig into what you've learned to that as we go on. And finally, Steve, last but by no means least, Steve, do you want to tell us who you are, what you do?
I am Steve Lambert. I'm the Senior Business Continuity Consultant at Biscon. As I already said, that we are a business continuity consultancy offering advice to customers across the mainly across the UK, but a few abroad, in terms of how to prepare for and respond to incidents, whether it be fire, floods or pandemics.
So it's certainly been an interesting time for you, and I know something we've talked about before, but some of the kind of planning and consultancy work you've done has been specifically around pandemics in the past, hasn't it?
It has, and I think to our degree, we've been actually following pandemics the way that they've been, in terms of whether it be swine flu or bird flu or seasonal flu, that people are going to be off for like 3 to 5 days work, hopefully back into the workplace after a short period of time, and staff turnover would be ongoing really, but we've never had anything to this degree.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously it's opened up lots of challenges, and one of the first areas that I kind of wanted to explore with the three of you was the idea of the kind of things that you've learned. You know, what have been your impressions of kind of the last 6 or 7 weeks? You know, we're recording this as of Tuesday, May the 12th, so you know, we appreciate advice is changing all the time, but you know, maybe start with you, Jason. Yeah, what are some of the things? What are some of your impressions over this kind of first 6 or 7 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I deal with a lot of IT departments, you know, helping to do planned upgrades, system maintenance, you know, system rollouts, that kind of thing. And really what I've seen is essentially all planned IT projects being delayed massively, with a no date as to when that will be resumed, because people are just so uncertain as to, you know, when a sense of normality will be able to be resumed. And really kind of mindsets of IT departments changed from, you know, what considerations do we need to make around getting this technology deployed, to just get it there. The businesses demand, we need the technology now to form a COVID response. Just deploy it, make it work, deal with any problems later on.
Yeah, and I suppose that kind of dealing with problems later on is an interesting concept. So it's very un-IT, isn't it? That you know,
Yeah.
there's often a lot of planning, often a lot of forethought that goes into an IT project. But that's something you've seen change. That a lot of that kind of thinking and planning has gone away.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not completely, but it's definitely taken a backseat in some customer deployments, you know, purely because they've been forced to deploy technology at such a pace that the consideration that would have otherwise been made around, you know, security and backup, for example, just hasn't been available to them. You know, we've quickly seen, you know, a massive increase in organisation using the likes of Zoom, using the likes of Microsoft Teams, and now having to kind of look back and almost retrospectively make considerations around, you know, how should this have been secured before we rolled it out to our users. You know, for a lot of organizations, you know, they've had 2 months now of working with Microsoft Teams. There's been very few that I've spoken to that have actually put any consideration around getting that backed up.
Yeah, so Frank, obviously you're spending a lot of your time talking to CIOs, senior business executives, and have been over these kind of first couple of months of the situation we find ourselves in. And the things that Jason and Steve have spoken about so far, is that kind of what you're seeing reflected in your conversations?
It is. I mean, the thing that strikes me is before we all worked within a lockdown and worked from home, Gardner's experience was to talk to most of our customers through physical meetings in big rooms every 4 to 6 weeks. And, you know, we learned an awful lot about what our clients needed, what they wanted to do. But I think the lockdown, whilst people went home, introduced an element of uncertainty into everybody's personal lives and certainly their professional lives. And so to compare the two time zones, I suppose, is, I think the CIO forums, which we now run on a Tuesday and a Thursday morning at 10:30 each week, people are brutally honest in a way that they probably were more guarded when we were physically meeting them. And I think the thing that I've learned is that all of us at some stage are going to have a wobble personally where, you know, you start worrying about your situation for your family, your friends, your colleagues, your working future. And that's just compounded by the professional challenges of having sent a lot of people home and trying to organize, deploy. And, you know, we've heard from Jason that the fact that now, almost as an afterthought, which is, well, these changes were forced upon us urgently. How do we secure them now and manage them going forwards? Oh, and then just to you know, add a little bit more uncertainty, since we're not sure what the physical workplace will look like, what do we provide for going forward? How do we plan now? So I think, you know, there's some really big challenges and changes in people's lives that I've noticed. But I think, you know, the one thing that's overwhelming is the sheer honesty and the fact that people are being quite brutal in facing up to some of the challenges they've got.
Well, you mentioned, Frank, the CIO forum there, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I understand that's something that, as a company, Gardners have delivered from the onset of, you know, that lots of people's changed working environments. I mean, what are some of the things that, you know, what was the thinking behind setting that up, and, you know, and has that been useful? What are some of the things that you've seen through that forum?
Well, I think it's actually, you know, it goes without saying, you need to listen to your customers to know what they want. And you have to give them what they want. And I think our industry has been guilty at times of selling people or pushing people into ideas and strategies that perhaps it wanted as opposed to what they wanted. Now, there's no doubt you can only buy from what's available. So, you know, by and large, the reason that people took Teams up with such enthusiasm is because it's written by Microsoft, and, you know, it's a tried and tested provider of solutions, even though we all know that there are other solutions out there. But that seems to be the one of choice at the moment. So on top of that, I think some of the things that we've heard over the last few weeks is the problems for people now is they originated probably some 3, 4, 5 years ago with a lack of investment in suitable IT. We've spoken to a lot of clients over the last 6 weeks who said when they first started operating a shutdown, there were lots of people within their enterprises who didn't trust staff to go home and do a proper day's work for a proper day's pay. Yep. And they've learned to their great satisfaction that was just so ridiculously untrue. I mean, you will always have somebody who cheats the system, but the vast majority of people like their jobs, want to see themselves making a difference and want to be suitably employed and engaged and want to have a future. So I think, you know, it's interesting that today of all days, they've decided to extend the furlough scheme on the proviso that people aren't claiming that just because they can, but because they have to, and they want future, and they need to build that future and use that scheme to make sure that in a few months or weeks' time that they do have a future. So we've seen that, you know, and then the next thing I think, which came up this morning at one of the forums, was what somebody said, It's all very well running out the door with emergency technology, and that's great because it works. The sad thing is that an awful lot of the staff weren't trained adequately in how to use it, and now they're trying to catch up. And I think that's another issue, which is it's poor preparation really from all of us, because of course none of us could see this coming.
So, well, that leads on really well to a question I had for Steve, and maybe, from the same kind of point of view, you spend a lot of your time working with organisations to plan for this kind of thing. What's been your kind of impressions of how well prepared many of your customers were, many of the businesses you've dealt with, and how much of a surprise was some of this to some of them?
I think it's not so much the fact that it's happened, it's the amount of time that it's gone on for, really, from our customer point of view. We have seen a massive shift in the way that organisations are working now, and some of them who were pretty much dead set against remote working for their team members have been forced into doing that. So, as Frank's just been saying, in terms of the technology and the security and the training, it's all required as part of that. From our customer's point of view, I mean, we've actually seen a lot of our customers have been fairly well prepared for this. We've done lots of training with them. We've actually done business continuity promotion throughout the whole organisation, so all the staff know a little bit about what to expect. I think it just the fact that we've had prior notice of this, because had it been an incident where it was a sudden impact type incident and staff hadn't taken their laptops home and hadn't taken their devices and etc. home, then it would have been a different situation. Having this prior knowledge and people can prepare for it then has made all that difference, because the way that organisations are communicating now and continue to work has been fantastic. The other thing from our customers' point of view is that they've actually been reviewing what is critical to them as an organisation in terms of what are their customers' requirements and what are their staff requirements, etc. And what the expectations are possibly when they go back after the pandemic is all over and done with. Is their customer database still going to be there? Has their customer requirements changed going through this type of event?
Yeah, and I think that actually leads on, interestingly, to another question, which is, as organisations, because they practice this kind of thing, they had built their continuity plans to deal with, pandemic just being one of the many things they would have had in the plan. Have you seen any of the organisations you've dealt with had to adjust their plans hugely because actually they found that it's just not what they planned for, or the process they had just wasn't suitable, wasn't fit for what they wanted to achieve?
No, not really. I think from a business continuity perspective, we certainly based a lot of our planning on the actual impacts on the organisation, i.e. loss of staff, loss of access to workplace, loss of IT systems. So they've not had to make massive changes. It's just the fact that it's been going on for so long. A lot of our customer database has actually furloughed a lot of their staff, so they know what their minimum requirements are to maintain their critical activities.
If you look back now, I think the one thing you can learn from all of this is that I was watching the news the other night. They said that Cobra had a project in 2015 to prepare for an outbreak like this. And the one criticism is now it was inadequate. And I think the one thing we can all look at now and think that none of our preparations were adequate enough. So whilst one of the things that we will probably have to consider, even as part of today's debate, is where does this all go? The one thing that we can understand is that in the past, we've not been prepared for this. So I suppose the lesson we can take from it is, how do we learn over these next coming weeks and months to adapt and be ready to accommodate those challenges and those changes in a way that we weren't really fit to do in the first quarter of this year?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been concentrating with our customers on is actually recording what happened in terms of the pandemic, when it broke, what preparations they put in place beforehand, monitoring how they're working on a day-to-day basis now, so that post COVID-19, we can sit back and say, okay, what worked well, what didn't work so well, what changes need to be made going forward. And I totally agree in terms of what you're saying about the government and the pandemic. It's right up there with cyber attack on the utilities or terrorist type incidents. It's the number one threat in the UK, but we are ill prepared for it.
Well, the point is, this may well not be the last we hear of either this virus, another virus, or yet a different type of, and it could be a cyber threat. And it's that, you know, if we are hit, for the sake of argument, with some kind of a cyber threat on top of this, it would be a really bad time to do it, because people are really teetering on the edge of being resilient at the moment. And I think it's those things we now need to be planning for, thinking, these are the things that we've faced over the last few months. What might hit us in the coming months that we need to be, you know, mindful of, if not working on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I could just jump in there on a technology perspective on this. So what I saw in the first couple of weeks was that IT departments have business continuity plans. They exist and they work, and they're quite good. I think what a lot of the companies that I was working for were quite surprised was the scale of the problem. You know, a lot had VPN connections. VPN connections designed to work remotely from home for, you know, maybe, you know, a quarter of the workforce, for example. Overnight, almost, it was everyone suddenly hitting those links. The VPN links are suddenly maxed out, and suddenly, you know, it's a case of we can't work remotely, even though the plans do work at a high level from a business continuity perspective. Once you stretch that out to the scale that we saw, it didn't take much for VPN links to start struggling, and actually remote working to just become unbearable for remote workers. You know, and that's kind of what I think we'll see from this. It's not very often that you get a chance to really test your remote working strategy in anger, and I think that a lot of companies will be going back and doing exactly what Steve says there. Review what worked, review what didn't work. I think that what we'll see is that a lot of the technologies that have been put in place as a kind of knee-jerk reaction to, you know, okay, the VPN's not working, what other options have we got? Okay, well, let's quickly onboard a cloud platform, for example, and get users working that way. I think that we'll see a lot of those platforms remaining, and actually customers to start to work from those platforms on an ongoing basis. So working from home or working in an office becomes irrelevant at that point. You know, we're not tied to infrastructure. We've looked at the cloud service, and that, you know, that's being onboarded. I think coming back to my point earlier, you know, because of that kind of, you know, the IT department feeling, okay, we're under pressure here, the business is crying out for a working solution. You know, that's the reason for, you know, the kind of retrospective security fixes that I've been working on a lot over the past couple of weeks.
Is that kind of a view that the rest of you share, in that something that Jason's talked about there is the idea that some of the stuff that's been adopted technology wise will remain in place for the longer term? You know, it's probably not going to be rolled back once we start to see wider release of the kind of situation we're in now. Is you know, is that being repeated not just in a technology position but across other parts of people's businesses?
We spoke to somebody this morning who said, in practical terms, they were going to shelve the idea of redeveloping their 5 or 6 UK sites, physical offices, in favour of investing that money in end user facility. So, in other words, upgrading the broadband connections for them at home, giving them better kit to work with, and seeing that as a better investment. Well, that's quite a change, actually. Because in the past, if an employee had pitched up at an awful lot of employers and said, by the way, can you get me a better broadband connection at home, it would have been good luck. But now that's being seen as a necessity rather than a luxury.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We've seen several of our clients actually talking now about rather investing into serviced office accommodation for loss of their workplace, is going down the lines of reducing their footprints in terms of their office space and getting their staff more mobile working or agile working.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the technology side of things, it's how organizations work in terms of what services they can provide to their customers and how they're actually providing that now, possibly in a different way than what they've ever considered doing before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very true, isn't it, that we're going to see a lot of the changes that have been forced upon people. You know, changes that people have had to make in the kind of the first 6-7 weeks of where we find ourselves. That many of those things are going to stay. But look, as we kind of look to wrap up a little bit on what we're talking about here, you know, again, maybe go around the electronic room that we're all sat in. You know, what are some of the things that you know, you would be looking at organisations doing next, either things that you're talking to organisations about, or things that you've heard people talk about that you know would be a good tip for people watching this video. Maybe start with you, Jason. You know, what are some of the first things you'd be expecting people to do, kind of from the 12th of May onwards?
I think review what's working for you and what's not working for you from a technology perspective. Look to see what systems have been deployed as part of a COVID response, and if those systems are going to remain as part of technology that you use going forward, you know, what considerations, you know, do you need to be made around, you know, specifically making sure that that data is as protected as data that sits on your on-premises infrastructure, and is likewise as secure as well. You know, data security in the cloud takes a different approach to the way that we would tackle with traditional on-premises infrastructure and the security associated with that. So really, yeah, review the systems that you've rolled out. Look to see how they can be improved and how, you know, you can continue to give your users a good working experience, a good user experience.
I think to pick up on that, you know, obviously thinking about what my response to that would be, I think the one thing we can learn from this is to actually talk to the users and ask them what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what they've enjoyed, what they've been happy with. You know, there's no doubt about the fact that the data is the key thing, is the important thing to be protected. That will always be the case. But of course, if people can't use that data, can't access it, and can't manipulate it satisfactorily, then it might as well be just locked away as, you know, as safely as you can make it. But I do think that it's time really to start asking the people who use this what works for them and what they enjoy and what they would like to see enhanced.
I mean, I think just to add to that, Frank, and you mentioned kind of the CIO forum that you've been running during this. I think one of the things that we've seen that's been really valuable for the participants in that has been sharing their experience, sharing their plans, sharing some of their difficulties. Do you think that's a valuable thing to do as well?
I think it's an excellent and praiseworthy and very honest thing to do, because you know, under Chatham House rules, they've been brutally frank with one another, and I think it's been of mutual benefit and support and reassurance to them to talk to one another on that forum. Their problems, you know, 85% shared, and the 15% that isn't is innovative and new and relevant to them, and you know, nobody can be in possession of everything. So it's been really helpful, and I think they've really seen that as both a personal and a professional prop and support in what for most of them has been very challenging.
So what about for you, Steve? You know, what do you expect to see the people you deal with looking to do next?
I think start considering what will happen when you do start to return to the workplace, by putting procedures in place, checking the workplace, running the water supply, making sure there's no Legionella, etc. But carrying out an ongoing review of the practice and the procedures within the workplace as they are going through this type of incident, and carry out a SWOT analysis. What's your strengths, what's your weaknesses, what's the opportunities? And there will be opportunities for some organisations out there, but what's the threats to the organisation? Are there some suppliers that have done actually work better than yourself? And then in terms of business continuity, just prepare. Make sure that you look at all these different risks to your organisation and have procedures in place for responding to them.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like listening to the three of you that, you know, the advice is very similar. You know, it's review what you've done, understand what worked, what didn't, what you're keeping, what you're not, and be prepared to share that. You know, I think there's, you know, because these are, you know, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase unprecedented times, but they truly are. You know, I don't think, certainly none of us have lived through anything like this again, and hopefully we won't have to in the future. But, you know, in these kind of unprecedented times, the idea that we can share what we've learned, can share what works, what doesn't. It should be valuable to all of us. Well, look, as we come to the end of our recording here, I may just like to take a last whiz around the room and just to maybe get a final thought on either things that you've seen, things you expect to see happen next, or any kind of worldly tips of advice that you might have for people listening to this or watching it. So I'll start with you, Steve. So any kind of final thoughts?
I think the way that technology has assisted organisations in responding in the way that they have, if you think back 15, 20 years ago, if this had happened and we didn't have the likes of Zoom and Teams, etc., and so off-prem hosting of IT, then we wouldn't have responded half as well as what organisations have.
Thanks, Steve. And Jason, what about you? Maybe from a technology, final thoughts, final ideas?
Yeah, I think change. What we're seeing is change. Change to people's mindsets with working remotely. A change to technologies that people are getting familiar to using. And not all change is bad. Change is good. Change is change. So I think embrace it. Don't be scared of it. We'll get through this.
Yeah, I think, just to add that from a technology point of view, actually, one of the things that I think I've seen and is encouraging that we certainly prior to this had discussed with lots of organizations about kind of future data strategies, so how they were going to embrace cloud, how they were going to be able to move data around, have it more accessible in more ingenious ways of using it. And I think it's interesting to see that a lot of organizations are now rushing back to those plans as they're starting to think about what's next and thinking, how do I embrace some of these new technologies? How do I make the right investments in the future to ensure that if we see ourselves in a situation like this or a repeat of this over maybe the next 12 months, how we'll be in a much better position to deal with it. And maybe Frank, final word to you. Is there any kind of final thoughts, final summary of what you've seen or what you've learned over the last few weeks?
In our 35-year history, it's just been a complete process of adapting to change and challenge. And this is no different. I think the change and challenge is accelerated, and there's certainly been greater challenges. But the one thing we all noticed early on in this was it was bringing out the best and the worst in some folk. And I think the one thing that I've thoroughly enjoyed is seeing the best it's brought out of some of the people we've worked with, because I think their honesty and their candor and their willingness to approach this on a selfless basis has been absolutely heartwarming. And I'd like to see that continue. I'd like to see us use our skills and our abilities for the common good. I mean, I know you two are working very heavily with the NHS at the moment, and that is, that's very encouraging to see that some great skills have been brought to bear in a place that really needs it. And as Jason said, we will get through this. We will accommodate it, but it's a question of doing it with an open heart and an open mind, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, look, gentlemen, I think that's been very useful. It's been, really interesting to kind of hear some of your experiences, some of your different views, some of your thoughts of where we head in the future. So thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon to talk about that, and look forward to speaking to you all again in the not too distant future.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We hope you found that useful. If you do have questions, then get in touch with your Gardner Systems contact or leave your information on the website and somebody will be back in touch with you. If you enjoyed the video and want to check out more of our tech video series, then look for the tech video section on our website. So until next time, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on a future Gardner Systems tech video.